like an eternal summer. He's saying your eternal summer. And he's also not personifying anything. So we know that this is a metaphor. Now, what does it mean that your eternal summer shall not fade? Well, if eternal summer is this long-lasting beauty, it means this person's beauty will never go away. And last example, nor shall death brag. Now, death is not human, and death, because it's not human, cannot actually brag. We can, right? As people, we can totally brag. I can say that I'm the best. Really, I'm just at everything. But death cannot brag. Death is not human. It does not possess the ability to do this. Therefore, I know that this is personification. Now, what's the point? What does this actually mean? Well, in this case, this little line here just means that death cannot boast or brag. And if you remember, if you go back to the actual sonnet, it says, nor shall death brag, thou wanderest in his shade. So he's just using this here to say that death cannot, not even death, can take your beauty from you. If you have any questions, pause here and ask. But if you're ready to, let's move on. All right, let's see if this is any better. All right, so now they give us just a tiny, tiny little excerpt. And this is from the Seed Shop. I'm sorry, I'm drinking coffee. So let's read this. Here in a quiet and dusty room they lie. Now, even if I didn't have the directions, which I actually do over here, I start to notice that they're giving me a lot of adjectives. So I'm actually going to pause and just check the directions and see if it's okay, if it makes sense and I notice that. So it says, close reading. In addition to figurative language, writers may use words with strong connotations or words that express positive, negative, or neutral feelings. Now we're going to underline the words with a negative connotation. Now, connotation, like it says in the Ready Book, it just is the feeling that comes along with the word. So if I were to say to you that, if I were to say to you that the hallway is dreary, dreary has a really negative feel to it and kind of brings about this sad mood or tone. Now let's come over here. It says here in a quiet, which could be good or bad, right? Quiet doesn't really mean much by itself. It depends on the situation. But here in a quiet and dusty room they lie. Dusty has this like dirty, left alone feel to it. Faded as crumbled stone or shifting sand. Faded means it's lacking color, right? It's not as pretty as it once was. As crumbled, so this is something that's kind of destroyed or being destroyed. Stone or shifting, forever changing, sand. Forlorn is like really, really sad. Sad, forlorn. As ashes. Now, when I think of ashes, I think of destruction, right? Of a fire having burned or of something having been destroyed and left to ash. Shriveled, scentless, dry. And then the last line doesn't have any of that. Then all of a sudden we go from like this very dark, gray, quiet, possibly destructed scene to meadows and gardens. Now, when I think of meadows, I think of green and happiness and flowers. And gardens, right? Flowers running through my hand. So I just noticed right off the bat that the top part of this excerpt has a really kind of dim, sad feel. But the last line is pretty different. Now, let's direct our attention to the question below. So which of the following from these options below best describes the connotation, remember that's a feeling, of the meadows and gardens metaphor? Now, if you're wondering where the metaphor part came from, it's because meadows and gardens literally can't run through your hand. So they're using this here as a metaphor to describe something else. Now, option A, the metaphor is neutral and simply completes the image developed in the first 3 lines of the poem. Option B, the metaphor is positive and starkly contrasts with the description in the first 3 lines of the poem. C, the metaphor is frightening and creates a jarring image that is completely disconnected from the earlier description. D, the metaphor is negative and reveals that the speaker is confused or in conflict with her feelings about the seeds. Now, you probably can see that I actually circled this already, but I want you to stop and think about why. And that's actually what the writing part of this is now going to ask you to do. So look at the answer you chose above and explain how the words in the poem led you to make that choice. And since I already circled it, what the heck, I'll just give it to you. If you're thinking about this question, the correct option is B, and here's why. The metaphor of the meadows and the gardens, that is super positive, right? Meadows, green, lush, happy. Gardens, flowers, beauty. That's a positive metaphor. That has a very positive feel to it. Now, the first 3 lines of the poem are completely different, and that's where the contrast comes from. And there's your answer. Now, if we were to go back and make sure that we're totally right, like we're going to just fact check ourselves. Option A says that the metaphor is neutral. It's not. Meadows and gardens bring to mind these wonderful images. So that's how I know it's not neutral. It definitely creates a very positive image. So I don't even need to read the rest, although I'm going to prove that. Now, it also says that it simply completes the image developed. It does not simply complete the image developed. The image developed here is that dim, sad one that we have. There's no way that this last line completes that. It's completely different. Option C says the metaphor is frightening and creates a jarring image that is completely disconnected from the earlier description. Now, there is a disconnect, right? Absolutely. So if I read this too fast, I'd think, yeah, maybe this is the right answer. But it's not disconnected in the right way. It says here that the metaphor is frightening. While the top part of this excerpt could be frightening, this last line is not. In fact, it's the opposite. It's that happy image. So I know that C is not an option. And last one, D. The metaphor is negative, which again, it's not. It's meadows and gardens, and reveals that the speaker is confused or in conflict with her feelings about the seeds. Now, they're throwing you these words that they kind of want to confuse you with. They throw conflict in there. There is a conflict of ideas, but they have it backwards here. The metaphor is not the negative part of it. In fact, it's everything before the metaphor. So if you have any questions, pause here and ask. Otherwise, I'm going to ask that you work on the question, or I'm going to ask that you put what we've discussed, or what I've discussed, and what you've listened to, into words in the show your thinking part. Okay, we're just going to move on actually to this last part, and this will be it for this lesson today. The rest will come tomorrow. All right, so now they're going to give you yet another poem. And I've noticed that a lot of these are nature poems, and that's where you're going to see a lot of really classic use of figurative language. This one is called A Winter Twilight. And Twilight, before it was ever that ridiculous book about vampires, is that time where the day is ending and the night is coming. So it's kind of that in-between time. Now, the Ready Book says, read this poem in which the speaker describes the sights and sounds of a winter twilight. Use the study buddy and close reading guide to guide your reading. Now, just think yourself. When you think of winter and you think of like 5, 6 o'clock, right, where the sun's down, but it's not completely night yet, what kind of feels does that bring to mind? Is it warm? Is it happy? Like what actually comes to your mind? So pause for 30 seconds and think about it. All right, so now let's actually read this. A winter twilight. A silence slipping around like death. Just because I can't help myself, let's make note that a silence slipping, if you hear that like the tongue twisting sound, that, if you recall from last year, or didn't know, either way it's fine, is alliteration. That's when you have the repeating of that consonant, in this case the S sound, a silence slipping. So a silence slipping around like death. They're comparing the silence to death. Yet chased by a whisper, a sigh, so it's not totally quiet. A breath. A group of trees lean naked and cold, inking their crests against a sky green gold. So you have these two images that are coming together, and they give you a picture of a tree below. So again, like try to picture what the poet's talking about. I'm going to see if I can pull up a picture that this image creates in my mind. So you're thinking about winter. You're thinking about that in between time, right? That 5 or 6 o'clock. Imagine you're walking down Gramerton. It's kind of quiet, and just imagine how the trees look against the sky, right? So when I read that line, I think of something like this, where the trees almost look completely black just because of the contrast of the sky and the light. So that's what comes to my mind when I read that. So let's get back. So inking their crests against a sky green gold. One path that knows where the cornflowers were. Now in this image that they're making of this dark tree against this beautiful green gold sky, there's this break, right? There's this path that knows where the cornflowers were. Cornflowers, or any type of flowers, really only grow in the spring or the summer. So there's this little reminder of the seasons that had come before. Lonely, apart, unyielding, one fir. Unyielding means not giving in, right? If you yield to traffic, that means that you allow traffic to go by you. Now, if you're unyielding, you don't allow it. You don't give in to that. So lonely, apart, unyielding, one fir. Fir in this case, it's just a type of tree. Ooh. And over it, softly leaning down, one star that I loved ere the fields went brown. Ere, again, because we're using like fancy old school chalk, it just means before. So lonely, apart, unyielding, one tree stands. And over that one tree, it softly leaning down, one star that I loved before the fields went brown. So try to picture this. You're in the snow-covered fields, and the trees are black, and the sky is this gorgeous green gold. And then off to the side, there's this one little path, and then by that path, there's one fir. There's one tree that's just standing all by itself. And over that one tree, there's one star that this person loved before all of this became brown and dead with winter. All right, so that's the poem. And if you have questions at this point, please pause and ask by all means. Now let's look at these questions and we'll go from here. So question number 1, what do the words inking their crests describe as they are used in the poem? Inking, now when you think of ink, what do you think of? So let that sink in and then go back to the poem. So yet by a whisper, a sigh, what breath, a group of trees lean, naked and cold, inking their crests against a sky green gold. So whatever's doing the inking here has something to do with this group of trees. Now think about that as you look at your answer options. And I'm not actually going to read these to you because I'd like for you to do that yourself. The second question, which phrase from the poem best helps the reader understand the meaning of inking their crests, which question 1 asked about? Now you're going to have to do a close read of the lines that surround that. And again, if you have a question, you can pause here. Otherwise, go ahead and answer the question. And the last question, which might be the farthest you get today. In the second stanza, right, that second paragraph of a poem, the speaker personifies a star, right? That one star that's kind of hanging over that single tree. Describe who the speaker compares the star to. Then describe how this personification influences the mood of the poem. Use 2 details from the poem in your response. Now, last thing I'm going to do for this lesson is kind of create a little visual. And yes, my picture drawing is pretty on point, pretty on fleek, as the kids would say, right? So pretend that this is a fir tree, and there's this one star, kind of leaning over, almost watching over the fir tree. And that's what I'm going to say for today. So if you have questions, by all means, pause at this point. Otherwise, feel free to go ahead and start this page. But 149 is where you are leaving off today. Awesome.